Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I hope everybody had an amazing weekend. I know I did because football is back. We had an officially real football game going on, and it was a great week of football as it was in football. Week 0 started off yesterday. Very, very excited for that. We'll break everything down that happened, including the first upset loss in the first game of the season. A top 10 team already falls. We'll break down that as well as SMU and a couple of other power conference teams that played in week 0. Then, or before that, actually, we're going to talk about the biggest news of the day, the headline of our show, CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb signs a huge deal, 4 years, $136 million. We'll talk about that, the new records that he has set, what it means for the wide receiver market going forward, and really just a historic offseason for the wide receiver market as a whole. We also are going to finish off, we've gone through every single team now. This is going to be the final team for the preview series of the NFL today, taking a look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just 10 days to football, guys. I'm so excited for the NFL to kick off. I cannot wait. And we're also going to talk about UConn potentially entering into a deal to join the Big 12. But before we get into all of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net, or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, today we are going to start off our show with the biggest news of the day. CeeDee Lamb, it broke just about 3 hours ago. As I was finishing up prep for the show, we had breaking news. CeeDee Lamb, Cowboys stud wide receiver, signs a brand new 4-year, $136 million contract. That is huge. That makes him the second highest paid receiver in the history of the NFL. Not just that, the second highest paid non-quarterback in the history of the NFL, falling $1 million behind a fellow receiver, Justin Jefferson, who also signed a massive contract this offseason. Although CeeDee Lamb does have records in other parts. He signs a $38 million signing bonus on that contract record. $100 million guaranteed. That's insane. $100 million guaranteed, and absolutely CeeDee Lamb deserves it. We've talked about this all off season long. We've talked about how CeeDee Lamb is one of those guys that undoubtedly needs a contract. And we've talked about how the Cowboys are kind of in not the greatest situation. And, you know, Jerry Jones, to his credit, backed up his words. There was a little bit of a controversy today and over the weekend because Jerry Jones had said that nobody else can do what I do. I'm not going to stop being the GM. No one else can do what I do. I do it the best. And immediately he comes in, backs up his words. That is great to see if you're a Cowboys fan, and now you need to see if he can do it with his other two guys. Dak Prescott is still looking for money. CeeDee Lamb just was paid, and now you still need to pay Micah Parsons as well. So that's a lot of money that's going to be tied up. This is an organization that, as weird as it is to call Jerry Jones and the Cowboys cash-strapped, it kind of feels like they're starting to get to that point with the amount of big contracts that they're going to have to give out. But getting back to CeeDee Lamb here. CeeDee Lamb has absolutely deserved this contract. He's a consensus top 5 wide receiver in the league. Some people put him up in the top 3. I'm going to put him here at 4, I believe, but he certainly deserves this deal. As much as it affects this season, Obviously, there were plenty of holdouts. He signs this deal with just 10 days left to go until kickoff. Obviously, they don't play on Thursday. They do play that Sunday. So the Cowboys have a little bit more time. They have just under 2 weeks to get CeeDee Lamb prepared for week 1 against the Browns. Now, this is not like he's starting from scratch. He knows this offense. It hasn't changed. You still have Mike McCarthy there. The offensive coordinator is still the same. So that shouldn't change the way it is. So I know there is some concerns about how he'll ramp up. I'm sure he's been preparing this offseason, even though he has been holding out. This is not something that should affect him week 1 too much. Now, we might not see 100% snap share for CeeDee Lamb, and honestly, it takes a little bit for everyone to get ramped up. That's how it goes. You don't often see 100% snap share for every single player when you're starting in week 1. Now, CeeDee Lamb should still see the field a bunch. And what this does outside of just the NFL landscape for the fantasy football community, this is huge. There was questions of whether or not he would play. There's no more questions. You can feel good drafting him all the way up at 1, 2, 3 again. This is one of those guys that's going to put up 100 plus catches, 1,500 yards, and 10 touchdowns. It's going to be he's going to be awesome. He is the weapon that this offense is going to be going through, because you look at the offense, right? Generally, the Cowboys have had a strong running game. And now what do they have? They have the aging body of Zeke, who I guess is supposed to be the every down back. Sure, he's good in short yardage situations, and what he did in New England was really valuable last season, providing those 1 yard, 2 yard goal line touches, and he should get plenty of those. But him and Rico Dowdle is not something that inspires confidence. Those two together, when I look at the running back rooms around the NFL, it's at the highest you could rank it, I think, is 30. And that's a shame, because the Cowboys generally have strong running backs. The offensive line looks surprisingly good. So this offense is going to run through CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott getting the ball to CeeDee Lamb getting the ball in space, doing what he does, a lot like last season. It should be a lot of fun, and he absolutely deserves this contract. This shouldn't change what the Cowboys' outlook is this season, but I do want to highlight the wide receiver market a little bit. In the beginning of this offseason, and we made it to the end, but at the beginning of this offseason, we were taking a look at all these guys that needed contracts, and there have now been 11 huge wide receiver contracts given out this offseason, with still potentially a couple more to come. Brandon Ayuk is still on the chopping block as far as getting a contract. T. Higgins might get one. He'll probably come next season. And Jamar Chase, that is where this next question comes. What is Jamar Chase going to do in reaction to CeeDee Lamb signing a 4-year, $136 million contract? What is the Bengals' reaction? Is this going to strengthen Jamar Chase's desire to hold in, to not participate? And we know that he showed up to practice the other day, actually practiced. He's been holding in, but he actually practiced with the team. Reports are they're still not any closer to getting a contract done, which we'll break down Jamar Chase and his contract situation more in depth in another day, another segment. But just to touch on it for now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I really don't get what he's doing. I'm all for players getting their money. Players deserve to get paid. The owners, and it's smarter for them too, for the owners to just pay these guys. The longer you wait, the more expensive the contract's going to get. The market's going to keep growing, and then you got to pay more. Older contracts always look better. You look back to Amon-Ra St. Brown's contract. He's making $30 million a year. He reset the wide receiver market earlier this offseason, and now he's sitting outside the top 5. We're just on the fringe of the top 5. That is insane. I mean, usually it doesn't change that quickly, but you look at markets like that, the wide receiver market that's growing seemingly exponentially as far as how big contracts are getting nowadays. You want to pay those top guys fast. And I know Jamar Chase still has an extra year on his deal, but he's the next guy that's going to have these big questions, that we're going to have these big questions about. So we'll see what happens. And again, we'll do a deeper dive into Jamar Chase later on in this week. His situation is a unique one and deserves a whole deep dive. But the wide receiver market as a whole, we knew it was going to explode this offseason, but to see the extent that it exploded to. I mean, the previous highest paid receivers were sitting around $25 million. Tyreek Hill was up there. He had to restructure his deal to get into the 30s to stick in the top 5. That is crazy, crazy growth. And 3 to 4 years from now, all these guys are going to be up again. We look at all these contracts that have been giving out, all these massive contracts, either 4 or 3 years contracts. These are guys that are going to be elite in 3 years. You know, the wide receiver position, it's not a quick fall off like running backs are. You know, these are guys that are going to get a second big contract, and I just wonder how big those contracts are going to be when we get to that point. But congratulations to CeeDee Lamb. He absolutely deserved that massive contract. It's big for the Cowboys to finally get the ball rolling on at least one of their 3 big free agents. Now the attention, I would assume, turns to Dak. He's the guy that has the most money riding on him and seems like he's the furthest off, because if he hits free agency, I can't imagine he gets less than 60. So we will see what happens with the Cowboys with Jerry Jones, as the season is just 10 days away from kicking off in Kansas City. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we are going to move into the world of college football. That's right. Football is back. We had our first action on Saturday. We are going to take a deep dive into everything that happens, including the first upset of the season on the very first game of the season. This should be a crazy year for college football and an excellent way to kick off the new era. So stick around. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
I'm losing my mind. It's everybody in the world. Please, Lord, give me a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. It's everybody in the world. Please, Lord, give me a sign. I want to be the greatest. Everybody on the take shit. I look around and feel like everybody is a fake. I make it every day. Shit, hoping one day blow up in the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. All this shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Rounds get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, it's stupid if you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose your gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Everybody in the world. Please, Lord, give me a sign. A sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. It's everybody in the world.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the record-setting deal signed by the Cowboys star wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb, finally getting a deal done, and he is ready to prepare for Week 1 against the Cleveland Browns. In this segment here, we're going to transition over to college football yet again, as we officially had our first real action of the year. Now we'll have no more weekends without football until February when the Super Bowl is over. I'm so excited. Week 0 is in the books. I cannot wait to talk about everything that happened with you guys. But before we get into it, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCpodcast.net, or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everything you guys have to say. I appreciate you guys tuning in, sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, in this segment here, we're going into the world of college football specifically to break down a week of upsets. College football week 0 came and went on Saturday. We are officially in the thick of it. The offseason is over. It is done. And what a way to start off this new era of college football. I've been talking about it all last week when we were doing our college football previews, but this is officially a new era of college football. This is the NIL era. This is the Power 4 era, not the Power 5 era. This is conference realignment, transfer portal. Everything is brand new, and they kicked it off in style over there in Dublin, Ireland. You had number 10 ranked in the AP preseason poll, Florida State, looking for revenge after being let go or left out of the AP college of the college football playoff last season after being an undefeated champion of the ACC, which has led to a lot of things we're here now. But they take on ACC opponent Georgia Tech over there across the Atlantic Ocean, right across the pond. And it is not the way that they wanted to. Things started out great, right? First drive down the field. They just march down the field. The run game is working. They score about a 30-yard touchdown on the ground. They got a little bit of pass. They got a little bit through the air through DJ Ulangalele, who's on his third school now after flaming out in Clemson and transferring out of Oregon State, landing in Florida State, which is a really good spot for him, and he has all the physical tools to be a great quarterback, but we'll get back to him in a little bit. They score, and then they go for two, which is a shocking opening to the game, right? First drive of the new college football season, first drive of the new college football era, and you go for two, and not only do you go for two, you snap it halfway across the formation to the left, which is awesome. I've never seen that happen before, and I think it's a super cool trick play. But it's completely legal. It works. They go for two. They're up 8-0 to start the game. Georgia Tech is there to answer, though. And before I get into the flaws of Florida State, as they lost this game on a walk-off, the number 10 goes down immediately. Again, a week of upsets. None of the favorites won against the spread if you're into betting. It was a crazy week. But Georgia Tech goes down the field, and again, this is the theme of the game. Their run game was able to take them down the field. In the first half, they threw the ball 5 times. That's it. Now, this is a Georgia Tech team that is built to eat clock. And if you let them beat you in the trenches, like Florida State let them beat them in the trenches, it is not going to end well. Georgia Tech has 3 drives that lasted 6.5 minutes or more. Most importantly, the last drive of the game, ending up on a game-winning walk-off field goal. That's not the way you want to go. And Georgia Tech is a strong rushing team. That's what they are. That's what their identity is. You win in the trenches. That offensive line got a lot of push. The defensive line got a lot of push. I was very, very impressed by their defense, especially against a high-powered offense like Florida State. I don't want to give Florida State too much flack, and I think the main reason that they lost this game was coaching. I hated the way that the coaching worked, which is not a good sign for the rest of the season. We'll just put it bluntly there, right? The clock management, that can get better. I hated the way that they managed the clock down the stretch of that game. That is not the way to do it. They didn't use their timeouts correctly. They let the clock go way too low so that even if they did kick a field goal, they had literally no time on the clock. If they had used the timeouts correctly, they could have gotten the ball back with about 30 seconds left and tried to engineer a drive down the field, at least gotten the ball back in the hands of the quarterback that had just tied up the game on a clutch drive. The play calling on that drive where they ended up tying up the game was also puzzling, head-scratching, right? They had to go for it on 4th down about 3 times, and they understood that Georgia Tech was chewing the clock. So you would think that, hey, we're going to try to go a little faster, because at that point they had 2 7+ minute drives. Maybe they wanted to go a little faster. There was no sense of urgency, and, they had the ball for the first half of the quarter. You think maybe the defense come out and make a stand, but the offensive play selection on that drive was atrocious. There were multiple times on second and long, 3rd and long especially was maybe the worst play call. They had a 3rd and long and they ran the ball. It was 3rd and 9. They ran the ball. It was a 1-yard gain. They had 4th and 8, and this was inside the red zone. This was a ridiculous play call. You throw the ball at this point. You don't need to get fancy. Georgia Tech had been dominating on the defensive line and the offensive line. Your running game at that point was getting no push, and really outside of the first drive, the running game wasn't really going anywhere for Florida State, which was supposed to be one of their strengths. Now, I know they had a lot of transfer portal guys, and I know that it might take a second, and especially in this new 12-team college football playoff format, they still have a chance to get in. But this one stings. This one stings bad. Now, I do want to keep some praise onto Georgia Tech here. I'm not going to go overboard. I've been hearing some Heisman rumblings for their quarterback, which I think is a little ridiculous. He played good, but that was a really good game from him. He's not a Heisman candidate. He should not be in Heisman talks. He's a really good dual threat quarterback, big physical guy, fast runner, can get around the edge, can break all the angles with his speed, and his power can get through a couple guys, and he's got a good arm too. But he's not the best player in college football. He's not close to that level, and I think one big win, one kind of signature win, is not enough to thrust yourself into conversations. We need to wait for a lot of other people to play. Overall, very impressed with Georgia Tech and what they're able to do. If they can get a lead, like a 2-possession lead early on in a game, they're going to be really tough to beat. Now, they do have a tough schedule, so that I'm not saying they're going to be 12-0, 11-1 kind of situation, but this is a team that really does have a shot to surprise a lot of people. I'd be surprised if they didn't make a bowl game, and they're on the up and up, even if they do finish like 7-5, 8-4 this year. This is a team that should be very proud of the direction they're going in, and they have a very bright future. Getting on to some of the other games, or excuse me, I never even got to DJU. People are blaming him. And some of that is for good reason. He wasn't particularly on point. He's always hyped up as this great quarterback, and he is a good quarterback, sure, but he's not up there in ranks. He's not up there. He always was supposed to be up there. He's supposed to be the next successor in the line of great Clemson quarterbacks. He never got there. He struggles against good opponents, but he made a lot of really clutch, tight window throws in this game, especially on that last drive that he had the ball in his hands. There's a lot of blame being put on him. You know the stat in the first half, his average depth of target was behind the line of scrimmage, negative 0.1 yards. But, if that's what they're going to do, that's what they're going to do. He's not supposed to be the focal point of this offense. The focal point is supposed to be the running game, and that just kind of disappeared towards the end. This is a team that can rely on him, I think. Now, they're not going to rely on him to throw 30 times a game, but he can throw it 15 times with solid accuracy, and he'll get better. He's warmed up. It's week 0. They were across the pond. They were in Ireland. I don't want to heap lots of blame on him. I think he did a relatively good job. That's not to say he was perfect. I think most of this blame should go on the coaching staff. They didn't prepare their guys. They didn't get them in the mentality to go and fight, and I think it really showed. Georgia Tech came out with a passion, with a fire, and Florida State was just, let's go play some football, guys. Let's go have some fun. This is, they needed to come out and be ready to play hard-nosed football, because that's what Georgia Tech is ready to do. And they just weren't ready for it. So I blame the coaching staff more than anything, but this is something that they can bounce back from. It's going to be a lot tougher now, especially in an ACC that I think is a little underrated, but they still have a path to the 12-team college football championship playoff. So we'll see how that goes. Outside of Ireland, the other games that were going on, there were a couple of huge comebacks. SMU almost losing to Nevada, who's supposed to be one of the worst teams in the whole FBS this year. Not a good look for your first game as a Power 4 member. It's good that they got the win, but they were huge favorites. They were unable to really make the jump. New Mexico State loses after being up 14 points in the fourth quarter. It's brutal. Again, these aren't teams that are supposed to be great. These aren't teams that are thinking they're going to compete for national accolades, national titles, but when you're up that big, you kind of want to take those. You kind of want to win those, and it stings to lose them. And like I said, just another thing, lots of upsets, not necessarily in the fact of underdogs winning, but when you go to the spread, not a single one of the favorites covered. And Hawaii's another one. They were supposed to win big against Delaware State, one of the worst teams in the country. They were 40-point favorites. They end up winning by 20. But that run and shoot offense that they were supposed to run, it was supposed to be extremely exciting, fast paced, but they were behind the sticks. They were behind schedule a lot of times. They were getting to third and longs, ending up in like 4th and 1s and punting on these short downs. They weren't getting down the field. That offense is supposed to be electric over there for the Rainbow Warriors. We'll see if they can improve. But again, it is week 0. I'm just excited that football is back. We'll do a bunch of predictions for a bunch of big games in week 1 coming up later on this week. So pay attention and keep your ears and eyes open for that. But I'm just excited that football is back. We're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we are going to transition into a little more college talk, not just football. There's conversation around UConn, the twice defending college basketball national champions, moving to the Big 12. We'll talk about what that means for the Big 12, for UConn specifically, and how that move might work. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just took you through the week of upsets that was week 0 in the college football season. We have football, college or NFL, that has some meaning. Every single week through the Super Bowl from now on, I could not be more excited. In this segment here, we're going to continue with college sports, this time taking a deeper dive into the Big 12 and UConn. There's some talks there that UConn might be joining the Big 12 as early as this year in a lot of sports. 2 years at the latest, maybe all at football joining in 2031. We'll talk about why that is. We'll talk about the implications for both UConn and the Big 12. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you are on YouTube, you can also use the Super Chat feature to do the same thing. If you have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, in this segment here, we are going to get into the interesting updates, we'll call it, between UConn and the Big 12. For those who are unaware, UConn, in football at least, is one of the few independent schools. When you think independent schools, you obviously think Notre Dame. Notre Dame obviously has huge brand value. Their football team, their sports are great. They have that whole exclusive deal with NBC. They're going to stay independent forever, maybe. Although that seems like it's getting harder to do in this new era of college football. But getting over to UConn. They're independent in football, but obviously in basketball, they're a part of the Big East. The Big East that formed out of the remnants of a former big basketball conference, and is one of the biggest basketball brands in the country, sporting teams like Villanova, Creighton, Georgetown, Some of these teams that over the history of college basketball have been the face of it. And right now it's UConn. UConn and the Big East go hand in hand. It's been the brand. Basketball is UConn, right? 17 national champions between the men's and the women's team. But now they're looking at moving to join the Big 12. And looking at it from UConn's side, it's obvious. The Big East isn't generating the amount of money that the Big 12 is, right? The Big 12 is getting that huge TV contract, especially for football. This is going to be huge for them to develop a football program. UConn, not a very good football program, which is why when I said in the intro, they could be moving some teams as early as this year if they can work that out with the Big East, which if I'm the Big East, I am not letting UConn go. There's a 27-month waiting period right now. So the latest that they would make this switch, if it is approved, is going to be 27 months from now. So we're looking at, I believe, 2027 is that season, or 2026, I believe. Sorry. That is very soon, and that will shake up the landscape of college basketball, right? That's going to take away a lot of power from the Big East. That is, like I said, this perennial basketball conference. Not that they're really going to be an awful basketball conference. I just went through a whole list of schools. They're still going to be good. But losing UConn, losing one of the biggest brands that your conference has hurts. It hurts a lot. So UConn looking at moving. Obviously, they're looking to move for money. The question is why the Big 12 wants UConn. Obviously, football is the big money maker. They just lost Texas. They just lost Oklahoma. They want a good football team. So why would you target UConn, who famously has one of the worst football teams? Only 2 bowl games in the last 17 years, I believe. Not a good look, right? But you have to look at the rest of UConn. Obviously, they have their basketball teams, and basketball, when you talk to the Big 12 commissioners, is something that he believes is going to be a cash cow soon. He's looked at teams like he's looked at adding teams in the past, like Gonzaga, which doesn't really do much outside of basketball, right? The basketball in the Big 12 is really good. They've been really good for a while. Texas Tech has had a really good team for a bit. Oklahoma State had a really good team make a deep run not too long ago. You have these teams in the Big 12. You constantly one of the best basketball conferences. And now you're adding the best basketball program currently in the country, presumably, as early as this season. Now, do I think it's going to happen this season? Absolutely not. But when we're talking about conference realignment, UConn and these other independent schools, as we'll say in football, like Notre Dame, have been some of the biggest topics of conversation. How long can these teams hold out? How long can they hold on to their independent status? You're losing money if you're not signing on to those stipends that you get every year, the revenue sharing that you get from these TV contracts. You're losing out on a lot of money by not being in deals, and maybe you can sign something yourself like Notre Dame has with NBC, but there aren't many independent schools for a reason, and your UConn isn't going to go sign a massive football contract with NBC. NBC's not interested in that. Nobody's interested in platforming strictly UConn football, because why would you? But the reason that UConn football, that would come over in 2031, is because that program is so bad. 6 years or 5 years, I guess, of that revenue sharing from the Big 12 should, in theory, let them grow to be that successful football team. And we've seen some strides in recent years. They made a bowl game just a couple seasons ago. They bring back a legendary coach recently. He's still there. This is a team that is going to continue to grow. And I think taking a look at the landscape around the league, there's not that is a huge weapon. Adding UConn is a huge weapon in, I guess, this war of conferences, we'll call it, right? Because right now the Big Ten and the SEC are king of the castle, sitting at the top. And as we know, in college sports, in sports in general, nobody sits at the top forever. At this point, the two conferences, the ACC and the Big 12, are battling to avoid irrelevancy. And right now, I think the ACC has a slight advantage. But if you bring UConn in, a team that's on the Atlantic coast, not that the ACC branding really means anything now that they brought in teams from the Pacific Coast, but a team that geographically would fit better into the ACC or the Big Ten. You bring them down to the Big 12, that takes away a big piece of ammunition that the ACC could use against you. And now now they're on the Big 12 side. Getting that big of a brand is huge. And if we're looking at if the future of college football, especially college sports, continues the way that it seemingly is going, getting a big brand like that is going to be massive. So there are huge benefits on both sides for the Big 12 and UConn, and we will see what happens. Again, nothing here is done. These are all just hypothetical talks. They're starting negotiations, and that broke over the weekend. We'll see what happens. I'll keep you updated on any other kind of news going on with the conference changes, conference switching up around the world of college sports. But we're going to take a quick break here. Excuse me. When we come back, our final two segments of the show here, we will be focusing on the Pittsburgh Steelers, the final team of our 32-team NFL preview. That's right, we hit the last one. Football season is 10 days away. We finished the NFL preview after today. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GS on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the potential of UConn moving and joining the Big 12, leaving the Big S, the Big East, and their independent marking in college football to join up with one of the Power 4 conferences. In this segment here, we are moving on with our 32nd out of 32 teams to preview in the NFL, finishing it off with the always consistent Pittsburgh Steelers. In this segment here, we're going to go over their offseason, everything that they did, and give them a grade. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, go ahead and throw that in the chat. Throw it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. I would be remiss before we get into the Steelers, though, if I didn't mention that my Washington Nationals are calling up Dylan Cruz, the number 3 overall prospect, tonight. I cannot wait. I'm going to be going to that game after this show. I know that was off topic, but getting into the Steelers here. The Steelers had, I would say, a good offseason. I know it's been marred by a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty up in the air, especially surrounding the quarterback situation, the quarterback drama. But I think either one they go with is an upgrade. And you know what? That's where we'll start here. The Steelers improbably made the playoffs at 10-7 last year. Once again, Mike Tomlin does his thing, gets them over 500, sneaks them into the playoffs. Unfortunately, they lose in the first round. They lose to the Buffalo Bills in what was not a very close game or a very good game by the Buffalo Bills either. But either way, the Steelers can't match up. They were relying on Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett. Not a good situation to be in last season, right? Now, they get rid of both of them. They're both gone. Kenny Pickett, traded to the Eagles. Mason Rudolph, out in free agency. Doesn't matter. They bring in Russell Wilson on a vet minimum deal, $1.2 million. That is the epitome of low risk, high reward. Russell Wilson is a guy that we've all seen it. At his best, is a Pro Bowl quarterback. Been to 9 Pro Bowls in his career. At his worst, is okay, good enough, better than what they had last season. At his worst is with the Broncos. And if we're being honest with ourselves, he wasn't good. I'm not going to sit here and tell you he was good. But I would take him in a heartbeat over Kenny Pickett. Point blank period. I don't see a world where Kenny Pickett, even in the Denver Bronco days of Russell Wilson, was better than him. So automatically, upgraded quarterback. And you say, wow, that's awesome. That's all they needed. They have that stout defense. The wide receiver core is pretty solid. The offensive line improved over the draft. The running back room is really good. You got 2 backs there. But then they trade for Justin Fields, right? Trade a 6th round pick again. Low risk, high reward. You're not paying too much money for him. You're not paying too much. He's a very talented quarterback, a guy that people were having legitimate arguments about whether they should keep him and draft Marvin Harrison or trade the number 1 overall pick and hold on to him instead of drafting Caleb Williams. Now, obviously, all of that was in vain. That was never going to happen, but still, there were real conversations there. He was good enough to pass up on quarterbacks last year, one of which CJ Stroud, who turned out to be incredible, the other Bryce Young, who they probably would have drafted. You can make the argument there who would have been better. But again, 2 years in a row where the Bears had to make that decision. They decide to move on. He goes to the Steelers, and now you have a quarterback discussion. You have a quarterback discussion that still has not been figured out. And that is the big question of the offseason. What are the Steelers doing at quarterback? Because the rest of their offseason was really good. They bring in Patrick Queen to bolster that defense. That's awesome, right? They draft Troy Fautanu to bolster the offensive line. The offensive line looks wonderful now. It's a great, although I will say the offensive line hasn't looked good in the preseason, but, on paper, that offensive line looks pretty good. They improved it a lot, right? And that defense is still going to be great. You still have TJ Watt, a defensive player of the year candidate. You still have Minkah Fitzpatrick, who, in my mind, should also be a defensive player of the year candidate, but not an award safeties win that often. I believe the last one to do it was Troy Polamalu, and that was a very long time ago. But this is a Steelers team that has no holes other than quarterback. No holes is a bit of an overstatement, but this is a really good Steelers team. They had a very good draft. In fact, it was so good, it was the consensus number 1 draft, which, crazy to think that the consensus number 1 draft wasn't the Bears with Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, but whatever. The Steelers always draft solid. They had a really good draft. Check mark on the draft. They're doing everything right. They even extend Mike Tomlin, who that's good enough. 17 years of not a losing season is worth an extension. Although there were some talks that he might get fired because, the Steelers haven't won a playoff game since 2016. So there are legitimate gripes against Mike Tomlin, but he's one of the best coaches in the league, maybe even the best coach right now. But this is a Steelers team that has the biggest dilemma, and it's at quarterback. And the issue is the famous line, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. This splits the locker room. Both Justin Fields and Russell Wilson think they're going to be the starter. Mike Tomlin says he would announce it at the end of the work week, so we're looking at a Friday kind of timetable here, just a couple days before the game. That is ridiculously close. You can't leave your offense waiting. Now, maybe that's a strategy. Week 1 against, a good team in the Falcons. Maybe you're trying to confuse them, not tell them who you're going to play. Got to prepare for 2 quarterbacks. Makes it tough on that defense over there. I doubt that's what Tomlin's doing. I think this is a situation where neither of these guys won the job. But you have to start one of them, and you have to think what's going to be best for the team. Do you want to go with the versatility of Justin Fields? He adds that extra option to the run game. Do you want to go with the veteran presence of Russell Wilson, a guy that, you brought in on the cheap, probably said he's going to be the starter, but he hasn't earned it, right? This is a tough question to deal with. And I am not envious of Mike Tomlin and the Steelers for having to make this decision. Now, if it was up to me, I'd give it to Justin Fields. Now, maybe Russell Wilson gives you a slightly better chance at winning games, but for my money, they're about even. And Justin Fields just allows you to open up the playbook a lot more. And Arthur Smith loves to run his play action. That's what he was successful in Tennessee. Ryan Tannehill being able to run the ball in Tennessee with Arthur Smith really helped that offense as well. You know, you put Jalen Warren and Najee Harris together with the rushing threat of Justin Fields. I think that is a great combination, especially when outside of, George Pickens, that wide receiver room is bare. You draft Michael Wilson out of Michigan. He's a slot receiver, not really going to fit, right? Not the way you want. You have Van Jefferson, deep threat, nice to have. He's not a guy you want to rely on, right? This is not a wide receiver room that is awesome. You have Pat Freiermuth, but this is a team that's going to want to run the ball. This is a team that's identity is going to be run the rock, win in the trenches, just dominate your opponents physically. And right now, they're not doing that. And I think Justin Fields is going to be the best at doing that because of that extra ability to stretch the defense with his legs personally that Russell Wilson used to have, but has lost in his, I won't say old age, but in his veteranship. He doesn't move the same that he did when he was in Seattle. So this is a tough decision. My money, I'd go with the younger guy, especially since he might even be the future Russell Wilson. You know what you're getting. You don't expect much out of him, right? Justin Fields could be a guy that you sign for the long term, but you have no idea if you don't play him this year. So there's a lot of decisions to be made. Overall, this isn't going to affect the offseason. They did the most important thing, which was improve at the quarterback position. I'm going to give them an A. They killed it at the draft. Free agency, they did a really good job signing the guys that they needed to sign, and they improved at quarterback. I'll say it again. Check, check, check. They did everything right. I'm going to give them an A. Not an A+, but just an A. They did a really good job in their offseason. You just need to figure out the quarterback. I believe in Mike Tomlin. I think he's a great coach. I think he'll make the right decision. But I think this is a decision you need to make before Wednesday for your team to be successful. Not only does it give a disadvantage to the Falcons in week 1 for their defense, but it gives a disadvantage to your offense because now you have to prepare for 2 playbooks, and that's not fun. We'll see. Shots Below the Belt says, I feel like both players have something to prove. Wilson playing to turn the negative perception of his legacy in the NFL. Fields playing for his future and proving the Bears made a mistake. You're absolutely right. They both have things to prove. But like I said, I'm going with the younger guy because Russell Wilson, while he wants to turn it around, I don't think anybody is going to remember his legacy as, that guy that was awful. Right? They're going to be like, oh, he was really good, and then he fell off a cliff in one of the worst trades in NFL history. Right? That's obviously going to be a part of his story, and I honestly just don't see a way that he is going to play well enough to turn it around on this Steelers team. Fields, at least, like you said, he's playing for his future. This is a guy that the Steelers could sign for the long term. It's one of those things that I do understand starting both of them. I really do, because I think honestly, if you were to analyze them one for one, they're probably about tied in who's the best. You go by rating or whatever. They're probably about tied. But this is a decision that they have to make for the good of their football team sooner rather than later. So we'll see what happens. But we're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll go over the Steelers' record, game by game, all 18 weeks, all 17 games, see if Mike Tomlin can continue his streak of going over 500 at least, 500 or better at least, for 18 straight years at this point. Tough stuff scheduled down the stretch, but we'll see if I have him doing better than that. So stick around. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the Pittsburgh Steelers offseason. Really good offseason, in my opinion. I ended up giving them an A for their grade. I believe they're only the second team I've given an A all year long, but they're the final team, ending up on a good note. We'll see if their record will do the same. They're going for over 500, or 500 or better, I should say, for the 18th straight season under Mike Tomlin. We'll see if I have them doing that. Vegas does not. They have their line set, I believe, at 7.5 right now. So we'll see. It is a brutal schedule down the stretch. But before we get into their schedule, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, in this segment here, we are going to finish off our show today going through all 18 weeks, all 17 games of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And starting off strong, like I said, week 1, they take on the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons are a team that I think have much improved, even since we did our preview video of them. Obviously, when I said that, their weaknesses were corner. They went out and they haven't really fixed that, but they went out and got another safety, Justin Simmons. They went out and traded for a star pass rusher, another one of their biggest weaknesses in Matthew Judon. They still have A.J. Terrell, who they gave that massive contract to. This is a Falcons team that really improved on offense and recently on defense. I'm giving this a win to them. Again, I apologize. This is a team that really did improve, but this is a Steelers team that I think their defense is going to be a little much for the Falcons to handle. I read my notes wrong here. I had the Steelers taking this one in Atlanta in week 1. Week 2, they take on the Broncos. Maybe, possibly, a revenge game for Russell Wilson. But we saw what happened in his last revenge game. His last revenge game against the Seahawks, that didn't go too hot. He doesn't seem to have an ounce of revenge in him. You know, he says he's dangerous, but like he doesn't have that revenge mentality in him. He's a good soul, right? And because of that, I have the Broncos taking this game at home. Week 3, they take on the Los Angeles Chargers. This is another team that's going to try and play a lot like they are. Run the ball. Hard-nosed football, win in the trenches. And I think that the Chargers, at least through the preseason, have shown that they're better at doing that. Also, I like Justin Herbert a lot more than either of these quarterbacks. I'm giving... I apologize. Once again, I read it wrong. Again, my fault. I'm giving this one to the Steelers. Both of these teams, again, play the same way, but the Chargers defense isn't the same as the Steelers defense. So the Steelers improved to 2-1. Then they take on the Colts on the road. Lots of road games to start off. Anthony Richardson, I think, is going to be a problem this year. Tough for any defense to stop. I'm giving this one to the Colts. They fall to 2-2 on the year. Then they get Jerry Jones and the Cowboys. New paid man, CeeDee Lamb, is going to run wild on them. I just don't see a world where he doesn't get about 200 yards in this game. Cowboys win this one as well. Then they take on the Raiders on the road. And this one I think is going to be really close. You have two potential Defensive Player of the Year candidates going up against each other. I'm taking the Raiders in this one. If there is a weakness on the Steelers team, it's at the cornerback position. And Devontae Adams is going to carve them up. As good as Minkah Fitzpatrick is on the back end, he's not a cover guy. And Gardner Minshew loves to feed his number one receiver. So I'm giving this one to the Raiders as well. Then they get the Jets, another top defense matchup. Two of the best defenses in the league from last year going up against each other. I am going to give this one to the Steelers. I think that the Jets' offensive line might have a little bit of struggles. They're older, they're injury prone. I think the Steelers can steal this one at home against the Jets. Back-to-back matchups against New York teams. They get the Giants in the next week. This one also at home. This one should be easier. Daniel Jones is nothing compared to Aaron Rodgers. They take a New York sweep, take both of those teams at home in back-to-back weeks, improve to 4-4 through 8 weeks. The Steelers, of course, have a balanced schedule. Week 9 bye. Always. Right in the middle, a good spot for that team to be, right where you want it. Be prepared for this brutal back half of the schedule, something that a lot of teams have been, a lot of people in the media have been talking about as one of the worst stretches. Although, for my money, again, I think the hardest stretch in football is the last 6 weeks the Dolphins have to go through. I think that is the most brutal stretch that any team in the NFL this year has to go through. It's not going to be easy for them. But the Steelers start off their bye week against the Commanders. Jaden Daniels, I think, is going to be a stud. This should be a good game, but I'm going to give this one to the Commanders. The Steelers fall to 4-5. Then they get, surprisingly, their first division game of the year, all the way in week 11. That is a lot. That's why this is one of the most brutal schedules, because this is a really good division. But the Steelers like to play their division tight. They're very good at playing in their division against their division. They take the Ravens on at home, and I think they're going to take this win as well. Improve back to 5-5. Second division game in a row. A brutal stretch. Division games are brutal. It'll wear you down. They take on the Browns on the road. I'm giving this one to the Steelers. The Steelers play good games against the Browns. The Browns play good games against the Steelers as well, but I think the Steelers take this game. They improve to 6-5 on the year. 3 straight division games in a row. They're going to play 4 of them in a row. It's not an easy ask. 4 out of their 6 division games are in a row, almost directly out of the bye. That is brutal. They get the Browns again, this time at home. They took care of them on the road just 2 weeks ago. I think they'll do it again. They improve to 7-6 on the year. Then they get the Philadelphia Eagles, a cross-state rival. Could practically call this a division game, although maybe I'm just making this a stretch. But I think they can take down this Eagles team. This is a team that has its share of weaknesses, especially its quarterback and its coach aren't getting along, and that could really hurt. So I'm giving this one to the Steelers. They improve to 8-6 on the year. Then they get the Ravens, the second to last division game of the year. This one is on the road in Baltimore. They're not sweeping the Ravens. That is a bitter matchup. They're not going 2-0. The Ravens take it this time as they fall to 8-7. Then they get the 2-time defending Super Bowl champion Chiefs. This is not an easy schedule down the stretch. All but one of these teams that they're playing, I have predicting over 500. And that one team is the Commanders, who I think could surprise some people this year. But they get the Chiefs, 2-time defending Super Bowl champions, Patrick Mahomes under center. It's going to go how you think it's going to go. The Chiefs are going to take care of business on the road. They fall to 8-8. They're in danger now, 8-8. But you know Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin doesn't fall below 500. It's just not something he does. They get the Bengals to close out the year. This is huge for both teams. The Steelers are eliminated at this point. It's going to take 10 wins to make it to the playoffs. But this is for Tomlin's legacy. You know, this is for his stat. They win this game. They take care of business, beat the Bengals on the final week of the season, making the Bengals lose this division, actually. That's how tight of a race this division is. They improve to 9-8. Maybe this is just wishful thinking on my part. Maybe I just kind of want this to happen again. But I think there is absolutely a world where the Steelers could continue this streak. Now, I will say, their ceiling, 9 wins. 10 wins, maybe. especially with the way that this quarterback is going. Their floor, we're looking at 6 to 7 wins. So this is a team that I was maybe a little bit nicer to than some of the other teams when we were doing our predictions, but this is still a team that has all the skill in the world. You go up and down the roster. Their defense is one of the most talented. They were 9-2 in one-score games, which might be a negative stat, might be a positive stat, because that team didn't change much. Maybe they were relying a little too much on their defense, but if there's going to be a defense to rely on, that's one of the clutchest defenses there are. Improvements at the quarterback position, a great draft. I have no reason to doubt this team can go 9-8. It is a tough schedule down the stretch, but I do think that they can do it. But let me know what you think the Steelers are going to do. Am I way off on my predictions here? Do you think Mike Tomlin's streak will finally end at 17 years? Let me know what your thoughts are. We'll be back tomorrow. Same time, same place. Going over all the major news from around the world of sports. We're going to start a fantasy football preview for the week. We're going to go over my rankings here over this next week, as well as any other major breaking news from around the world of sports. You've been listening to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I'll see you same time, same place tomorrow. You all have a good one. Good night.
Let's go. Bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Damn tired of shit, and the cops game hit, yeah, damn it.